Hi everyone. We still have a few people trickling in, but we're gonna go ahead and get started because we want to leave some time at the end for questions. Thank you all so much for joining us today and taking some time for your lunch hour. My name is Clay Hendricks. I'm a board member for the Public Relations Society of America Idaho chapter. Um, and we're super excited that you took your hour to listen to a really exciting speaker series. We try to offer these every month in order to give people learning opportunities in the communications realm. We have a wonderful speaker today. I hope you guys have lots of questions to ask. If you have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we will make sure to answer those at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to our speaker. Randy L. Teton is a tribal member of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes of Fort Hall, Idaho, and serves as the Public Affairs and Tribal Relations Specialist in the Office of Communication in their Washington, D.C. office. And with that, I will let Randy L kind of introduce herself. Randy L, take it away.
Thank you, Clay, and thank you, everybody. It's really good to be here on this beautiful Tuesday with all of you, and I'm really grateful to be able to share my insights that hopefully will help you in your field of communications. Um, Next slide, Clay. And as mentioned, in my language, I would greet you with Zondave, good afternoon. My name is Randy El Hido Teton. My given Indian name is Meadowlark, which is Hido, my middle name. I am a proud mother of 3 children. I was born and raised in Southeast Idaho. And before the state lines were created, my ancestors come from the Grand Teton mountain range on my paternal side, and my maternal ancestors are from the Nevada mountain ranges. And I come from a long line of leaders, horsemen, and hunters. And throughout my career, I have served as a former tribal ambassador. I served as the 2002-2003 Miss Shoshone-Bannock Queen. I also served as the official model for the US Golden Dollar coin. I also served as my tribe's youngest public affairs manager, and most recently published my first children's book called It's Her Story, Sacagawea. And also most recently solidified a position within the federal government as a public affairs slash tribal relations specialist with the Forest Service Office of Communications. And so to understand the disinformation that takes place about my people, the Native Americans, it's important for us to introduce my background and where I come from as part of sharing my culture with all of you. Next. These are some of the topics that I will be presenting today. And in the area of communications, the perceptions of Native Americans in media and the internet are missed opportunities for informing and educating people about the vast Indigenous people that exist today in comparison to the past. In Indian country, we have about 574 federally recognized tribes who all have distinct cultures, languages, and geographies. So in today's presentation, I will provide an insight of my experiences that I have had working in communications, and will provide the following: how to use public relations to advocate for diversity and inclusion, dispelling cultural disinformation, which is critical with the advancement of AI, my insights that can help foster belonging in the workplace, and then also understanding the need to include diverse voices for more innovative and better decision making on campaigns that we all delve into on a daily level. Next. I just wanted to throw this out there as a reminder of the definition of public relations. As professionals in the public relations field, we understand the roles that we represent with our respected companies. And for that reason, it is important to understand the individuals, the groups, the organizations that we represent. Today, I will I will discuss the need to recognize and understand the diversity that we serve in our communities. And according to the public relations for PERSA, the first bullet is public relations is a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and the public. Also, PR is the methods and strategies used to control how information about a person or company gets out to the public, especially in the media. And again, my perspective as a Native American in the field of communications has another layer that I will share with you all that is important to me and to the diverse nations, peoples that we represent or we engage in on a daily level. Next. I wanted to bring up my first national PR campaign started with the United States Mint. So in 1998, I was asked to model for a artist named by the name of Glenna Goodacre of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was only 22 years old, a junior attending college in New Mexico. Goodacre was selected by the US Mint to conceptualize an image of Sacagawea, who is Shoshone from Salmon, Idaho, and who was 13 years old with a baby who served as an unofficial guide for the infamous Lewis and Clark expedition of 1804 to 1806. Today, there are no images or sketches of Sacagawea. All the artist knew was that she was Native American, Shoshone, from Idaho, and it was up to each artist to do their own research on Sacagawea. Some artists did not conduct research and therefore created an image of a Native American for this new coin, whether that was in person or conducting online searches of Shoshone Native Americans. Although Goodacre did her research and found that Sacagawea was from Shoshone and from Idaho, she then went to seek out a Shoshone model from Idaho and actually found me by visiting the Institute of American Indian Arts Museum in Santa Fe, where she met with my mother, who served as a former museum director for our tribal museum. And she asked her information about Sacagawea so she can do her research on who Sacagawea was. And like any other mother, my mother had some photos of her three daughters. And right away, Goodacre chose me. And my mother asked me by phone, she called me up and said, would you be interested in doing some modeling? I actually agreed just out of curiosity of the project. Long story short, 1 year after modeling, I was called by the US Mint director that we made the final design cut and that these designs would be online for public voting for one final design. The design that you see here is the final design selected representing the courageous, strong, beautiful Sacagawea with her son, Jean-Baptiste. After accepting the US Mint's offer of joining the campaign to promote the new coin, I was asked if I would like to be the voice for Sacagawea, but it not only was the voice for Sacagawea, it was the voice of all Indigenous representation. And it actually took me 2 days to really comprehend what that meant. And again, I was in my early 20s, still in college, fresh from the reservation. And to be given that kind of responsibility, I had to think about it. I talked with my parents, I prayed about it, and I agreed that I felt that it was important to give Sacagawea an authentic voice of her compelling yet mystery of a story. And as you may or may not know, Sacagawea played a critical role in the Lewis and Clark expedition because of her knowledge of the lands and her ability to communicate with Native Americans using sign language. It was without her presence and knowledge that the expedition would have failed. And a lot of the information shared about Sacagawea during this time in the late 1990s was a glossed over version of the Lewis and Clark expedition that only shared a peek of who she was as a young mother amongst all these men in the expedition. This gave me more reason that I felt compelled to share my Indigenous perspective about Sacagawea's story before, during, and after the expedition. Next. Which takes me to the next phase. So sharing and being part of this national campaign, I was placed basically on a pedestal overnight. I had to learn how to do public speaking. I engaged in a week-long public presentation of how to conduct myself and how to communicate with the public when it comes to Indigenous peoples. Now, this is like a real rushed course that I learned, but I was able to be able to share my research that I started when I was 14 years old. I started my first job at the Tribal Museum. And when I had that job, one of the biggest questions I always received by the public was Sacagawea. Being 14 years old, I took it upon myself to do more research and ask my elders about Sacagawea, and I received a variety of different oral stories about her. And because of that research that I started at 14 and then led me to my early 20s to represent Sacagawea, I wrote all of my research, all my notes, and I was able to create this book. Because of the current books about Sacagawea lacked the Indigenous perspective and the emotional connection to Sacagawea, I felt it was important to write a children's book to capture and engage with the young readers. And as you all know, in Idaho, we study Lewis and Clark in 4th grade. Now, teachers that highlighted Lewis and Clark expedition did not share too much about Sacagawea because of the lack of information that existed in the public. And this is during the times where, going online and Googling Sacagawea, it wasn't, you had to go to the libraries and do some research. And so in my research of Sacagawea, I was able to share the Shoshone perspective of Sacagawea's story of her being captured, enslaved, and living through the 2-year expedition and then returning home to her family. I was able to share her story thanks to Sunbird Books and Phoenix International Publications, and it took me 1 year to get the book published. It was later released in October of 2023, and during the first month, it was recognized as the best-selling children's book. I was very happy to hear about this. And this book is very unique as it is written and illustrated from 2 Shoshone women. Both of us are from Fort Hall, Idaho, right here in Idaho. So again, this book is all about what we're talking about today, is looking at the Indigenous perspective and including us in the space, whereas before that was never the case. Tribes were never brought to the table to express their stories and provide that emotional perspective. This story is just one interpretation of the courageous Sacagawea that helps connect the audience on a more emotional level and resonates with the overall public about the life and challenges that we have faced in our journey. But more importantly, Sacagawea's journey that she overcame at such a young age. She was only 13 years old. And I think a lot of us don't realize that, is that she was 13 years old with a child. And I like to tell the kids that envision yourself being on a 2-year camping trip. This is what Sacagawea did, and she was only 13. Next. So we get into Indigenous storytelling is important. So as a Native American woman, I have learned since I was little to listen and respect our elders. When my grandparents spoke, we listened with open minds and heart. And I was told that my grandpa was a storyteller and would share stories about our connection to the animals and the places that we once flourished in. And as professionals in the line of communication, it is important when crafting a narrative or creating a campaign that involves tribes or any other diverse groups to engage and understand the culture first. So one tip I have always offered when working with outside entities is when you're working with the tribes, you want to seek out someone within the tribes to build the trust with the community and understand the culture first, because building trust and credibility is needed for any successful campaign. I wanted to also say that, you know, you also recognize that every culture has its own stories and narratives as a means of preserving their history and instilling moral values. That's really important, is that you can't lump all tribes into one. For example, the Navajo Nation, the Sioux Nation, the Shoshone Nation, the coastal natives, the East Coast, we all have our own creation stories of how we became to be. So it's always good to do some research on the tribe that you're planning to partner with. Next. One thing that I have encountered on various occasions in my line of work is words matter, especially to tribes, especially to diverse groups. Be cautious to choose your words wisely that may offend when working across the cultures. So you want to avoid the words savage, squaw, sacred, ceremonial, spiritual, princess, chiefs, stakeholders, redskins, medicine man or medicine woman or shaman. These terms are not indigenous to our language. And the fact that Native American people are rights and title holders and not stakeholders. So you want to avoid that word when engaging with tribes, is they're not stakeholders, they are partners. So avoid this term. Otherwise, it's used as a blanket term. And I've seen this a lot in a lot of briefing papers and a lot of campaigns that I've seen. Also, one thing that I have been a part of in my prior work is working with the public school systems in the state of Idaho of changing the names of the mascots. This was a huge effort that the tribe took upon themselves to work with the state of Idaho to identify the schools that have current mascots that are savages, the redskins. This is a colonized term that was referenced in government documents by white males as part of cultural genocide. So again, these are words that hurt our people, and you never want to say the word. And I know that there are some areas and locations in the state of Idaho that still have the name squaw, which is a very derogatory name for female Native Americans. So those are efforts that I know that a lot of tribes are still taking upon themselves to work with the Idaho State Historical Society and the Education Office. Next. So again, we talk about tribes. So when we think of Idaho, a lot of us think about majestic mountains, outdoor fishing and hunting, but in the shadow of those mountains and rivers exist our people, the Native Americans, who have long inhabited these lands and continue to do so, but were often overlooked. So today I want to kind of give you a glimpse of the 5 tribes of Idaho. Next. Some of you may or may not know this, but we have 5 federally recognized tribes that populate the state of Idaho. In the north, we have the Nez Perce, the Coeur d'Alene, and the Kootenai, who have all existed for centuries. Further south, you have my tribe, the Shoshone-Bannock, and then our sister tribe, which are the Shoshone-Paiute. And interestingly, the Shoshone-Paiute share their reservation in 2 states, Idaho and Nevada. Now, please note that each tribe has their own distinct cultural heritage, language, and history, and a story to tell. I've included 2 maps to show you how much land base each tribe lost before pre-reservation contact. The map on the right shows the areas that each tribe inhabited of those lands, and then the map on the left shows the current day highlights of the reservations in yellow. And you can see that we lost a lot of acreage, a lot of land, a lot of hunting grounds, a lot of encampment grounds. And my people, and I'm going to speak on behalf of my people, is that we migrated with the seasons. And so you'll see that our land base, it covers a good majority of southeastern Idaho. And that's because we traveled based off of the seasons and the buffalo hunts. We followed the big game, such as deer and elk. We also hunted salmon. And so, again, it was very important to have that migration trails and just be able to go into these landscapes. So, and it's sad because, again, these maps are used by tribal governments when speaking with state and federal officials for current day treaty rights and economic projects to show that we do have land and that these lands are ancestral to these respected tribes of Idaho. Next. So I wanted to hit a subject that a lot of us have probably heard. It's the misrepresentation of Native American culture in mass media. One perfect example I wanted to include was Pocahontas. We have seen cultural appropriation and stereotypes throughout Hollywood movies that portrayed inaccurate events and cultural way of life. And these type of mass media stereotypes are preventing us as a nation from knowing the rich and long history of Native Americans and their culture. Today, we have more Native American consultants and organizations that were created to battle these stereotypes so that way we can control our own narratives. Since my involvement with the United States Mint to working with the tribe, to working with the Forest Service, I have been able to assist in being part of overcoming cultural appropriation by educating and sharing what is okay and what is not okay when asked, for example, for Native Americans in movies, documentaries, articles, or social media posts. You'll see that today tribes now have media guidelines in place to ensure that our people are protected from misrepresentation. So you see here, Pocahontas, she's wearing a very short skirt. It's kind of hanging off of her shoulders. And sadly, Pocahontas, her story is very similar to Sacagawea's story, where she had no voice for this movie, nor did the tribe that she belongs to, the Powhatan tribe, which is in present-day Jamestown, Virginia. They were not contacted when this movie was created, and therefore created a lot of backlash from the tribes when the Disney movie was released. Next. So, when we look at what is successful messaging for any campaign or involvement with tribes or diverse backgrounds, we think of a common or complementary goal that benefits both, right? And I stress that if you have a project in mind that includes a person of color, please make sure to include them at the beginning stage of planning, because far too often we think it's best to draft a plan first, right? But you never know what ideas may come out of a planning discussion when you include all. And I wanted to stress this because I have been involved in various projects throughout my last 20 years when it comes to campaigns or creating a story or creating a documentary. Um, about water resources, or it could be a variety of issues where tribes are involved. But you want to reach out to the tribes and let them know first that, hey, we're going to be creating this. We have a concept, we have an idea, and what's your take on it? You want to create, again, that trust and that credibility of bringing them to the table. So again, your common theme of collaboration is always best to, include the voices, and that will bring some good success to the overall campaign. Next. I wanted to bring up the importance of tribal media resources. In today's mainstream US news coverage of our Indigenous communities, which include our challenges and our strengths, it's been sporadic and sometimes uneven and barely visible. And so invisibility in mainstream media has a disturbing consequence. It's from a Native American perspective, it becomes a form of erasure. And more reason, tribal media has increased in the last 50 years in delivering the Native American perspective to the national conversation. So I wanted to delve into tribal media resources. Again, as I noted, we have over 574 federally recognized tribes throughout the United States. So there should be no reason to not include any type of tribal news or including a highlight on a tribe that's doing some amazing work in the community. And so again, you'll see a lot more newspapers that have been created that give the highlight of bringing news to Indian country. And reservations are just like any other small community here in Idaho. Everybody wants to know what's going on, whether that's at the regional or the state or the federal level. Next. I wanted to bring up photographs and videos. In my experience, I've seen photographs that were taken and then utilized in articles where I didn't know that the photos were being taken or video was being taken, and then they were posted in the documentary or on social media. But when you are working with a tribe on a story, please make sure to ask what is okay and what is not okay to include. Now you'll see that each tribe will vary on what is culturally sensitive based on the object, based on the location, and even based upon the person that was interviewed. It could be someone that is considered sacred to their community and that they don't want to have their picture or their video included, but they have really good information. So you want to make sure that you're asking and just be mindful of the photography and videography restrictions that the tribe may have. And again, each tribe has developed a photo and a video release agreement. So then that way information is being provided to you to credit. Next. Another important aspect of communications is being aware of cultural sensitivity. Cultural property, also known as cultural patrimony, it comprises of physical items that are part of the cultural heritage of a group, as opposed to less tangible cultural expressions. They can include items such as cultural landscapes, historical buildings, such as boarding schools. It could be works of art that you see in beadwork or an art on a drum. And it can also include archaeological sites. It is noted that when deciding on whether to use a photo of cultural property, to be cautious and seek approval first. You want to avoid using images of petroglyphs, a ceremonial dance, an actual person praying, and or cultural events that might depict a ceremony that has taken place for a special reason. In my experience, when writing about a historical place, we always sought out the permission from the tribe and received a written photo agreement to make sure that they provided the caption to assure the name, the date, the photo rights, and the historical significance is accredited respectfully to the tribe. And I feel that in the past that was never done until the tribe started to see a lot of their pictures show up on the website and or in books. So again, it goes back to that trust and providing your credibility to them to assure them that they're not being taken advantage of. Next. Native Americans are slowly gaining recognition of being recognized, and this includes the need to hire Native Americans in the workplace. This brings me to my new role within the Forest Service, which is a perfect example of creating a position that is tied to a commitment of creating a more robust tribal relations program. In 2023, the Forest Service implemented a tribal action plan, which is the photo of the front cover of the tribal action plan. And this serves to the tribal nations a deeper commitment to the regular and meaningful consultation. And although today's presentation isn't all about my position, but I wanted to bring to light the changes that are happening within federal agencies, such as the U.S. Forest Service, that recognize the wrongdoings of the past and today are respecting treaty and trust obligations to tribal nations. So in a nutshell, the Forest Service in line of the tribal action plan is strengthening and advancing relationships between tribes and the USDA Forest Service. And overall, it is imperative for federal governments and businesses that you belong to embrace the long history of tribes and continue the dialogue for meaningful tribal consultation that results in success for all. Now, again, these are perspectives that I have that I'm sharing with you in a nutshell that I wanted to be able to just kind of just highlight. There's a lot more. I can definitely talk for another hour on any of these slides that I presented to you, but I wanted to give some time for some healthy dialogue and any questions that you might have for me. So in my language, I say, oos, thank you, and open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy L, so much for presenting. And I remind everyone, drop if you have any questions, either drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A box, and we can get those answered. In the meantime, thank you so much, talking about your background and how you didn't necessarily come from that PR background. It wasn't your first choice. You kind of developed into it, and you've really done well with it. Can you talk about, you talk about walking in two worlds as an Indigenous woman, and how walking in two worlds has kind of informed your background and your approach to PR and communication?
Yeah, so initially when I was approached to presenting, I thought about it. And, for me, being an Indigenous woman in the state of Idaho and working in communications, it really is walking in two worlds because I'm representing my culture and the history that my people are still continuing to fight. And then on the other side, in my hills, I represent the overall communications and being able to share our stories with others and educate. And so it really is, it's a balance act that I have seen, because again, I have to remember culturally and respectfully, we don't brag about what we do. And so I on this side, I could receive accolades of the good things that, I'm doing with my work. But, culturally, you have to be humble about the work that we do. And, I participate in my culture. Um, I teach my children, and so now they're even beginning that walk of two worlds. Um, and I think what really stood out was when my grandmother, who is a fluent speaker, and my grandfather, they're both fluent speakers of the Shoshone and the Bannock language, and they both went to boarding school. And they instilled in their children, which was my father, they did not teach them their language. And it was because my grandmother told her children that she didn't want her children to be ostracized and blamed for speaking our original tongue. And so they didn't learn the language at a very young age, but they grasped onto it. And I remember growing up, I would get yelled at in our language, and so I do speak, and I do share that with my children. So again, it's remembering the history that my people have been through, but also taking the education that I learned from college, from working off of the reservation and applying it to who I am, to represent, to educate, to build that understanding and to build the bridges that we need. We need to build more bridges from the reservation to the outside and vice versa. So to me, it really is walking in two worlds.
That's fantastic. Thank you. We had a couple of awesome questions come in. So the first one is, how do you recommend brands acknowledge and honor Indigenous Peoples Day while avoiding cause washing and appropriation?
That's a great question. And depending on where you're at, I would first contact the tribe and see if you can partner on having a tribal member present from that tribe to your event. Definitely, within the Forest Service, we don't just honor one day. We actually acknowledge throughout the year, leading up to Indigenous Peoples Day or Native American Heritage Month, which is in November. And so you kind of want to do bits and pieces to kind of lead up to what is Indigenous Peoples Day, what does it mean to Indigenous peoples, and really get that perspective. Host a webinar, host a community gathering. So that way your community can engage if they would like, and they can learn directly from the Native American people that you live within that community.
And we have another one saying, can you help me understand the relationship of the Shoshone and Bannock tribes? Are there cultural differences in their stories, etc.?
Yes and no. And so again, before pre-contact, the Shoshone were one large group, and then the Bannock were another group. And we would often come together when we were migrating. We would share foods. We had intermarriages. The languages are distinct. You have the Shoshone language and you have the Bannock language. I actually was raised Bannock. And originally, the Fort Hall Reservation was set aside originally for the Bannocks. But because the Shoshones dominated in numbers against the Bannocks, they ended up naming the reservation Shoshone Bannock. But together, we create a very strong nation of Shoshone Bannocks. And the same would go forth for the Shoshone Paiute. Um, there's a distinct band of Paiutes and the Shoshones. And the Nevada Shoshone, they're named the Western Shoshone. And then the Fort Hall Shoshones are the Northern Shoshone. And then you have the Eastern Shoshone of Wyoming. So if we were all together on one reservation, we would be a very dominant tribe, similar to the Navajo Nation and the Sioux Nation, which today are the largest tribes throughout North America. But yes, we are distinct, but now we're one. I don't think we have one full blood Bannock because we've been it's been integrated for so long. Great question.
And then the next question is in reference to the changing of names and mascots in Idaho for the inappropriate school mascots. How close is Salmon High School to changing their mascot name? And on the same vein, they are located on Warpath Street. Is changing street names part of that change process as well?
Yes, and a great question. I cannot give you an update on that at this time, just because before I left my prior position with the tribal government, that was one of the schools that we were working with, and the communication was not always 100%. But I can say that in my personal efforts, because of my representation of Sacagawea and serving as the model for her, that is something that I'm actually going to continue to do. I do know that um, it's a difficult process, and it's an emotional process for a lot of people that are alum to those schools, and we respect that. We acknowledge it, but we also are informing and educating to just how harmful it is to our people and to our children that are growing up hearing and seeing these types of um, names still in the system. And we even have our tribal high school going out to play basketball in some of these nearby locations, and they're experiencing the name bashing, the sounds of that you make with your mouth, trying to imitate a Native American, things that they've seen in the Cowboys and Indians TV shows. And so it it hurts them, and they question why. And so those are the reasons why I have felt compelled to continue the dialogue and continue to make those changes. So I don't have a definite answer, but it is a work in progress.
And then next we have a couple of different questions, so I'm going to group them together here on land acknowledgements. So what is your perspective on land acknowledgements? Are those helpful, and should they be published on web pages, etc.? And what's the best way to go about ensuring that they are accurate and appropriately phrased?
Great question. And I can tell you that I started to see land acknowledgements trend in the past 5 years. Tribes appreciate the land acknowledgements. I think that they are a good thing. It is a good step of acknowledging the Indigenous peoples that resided in that territory. I know in my previous work, we worked with Idaho State University, Boise State University, and then also some organizations out of Boise that were wanting to have a land acknowledgement on their websites. And so those were created, they were approved by the council. When we do have functions held on the reservation at our event center, uh, we do have our Miss Shoshone-Bannock that would be present to read the land acknowledgement. And sometimes she does it in our language, which is great, because again, you're giving that emotional um, the fact that we're still here, and these are lands that we once lived and thrived, we hunted, and that whole pre-contact and the removal to the reservations was really hard on our people. And we still have elders today that remember what their grandparents told them about the trail of moving from their homelands to the reservation, and just how hard that transition is of not being able to hunt, not being able to gather the resources that we once gathered for food, and having to rely upon the federal government. The railroad lines were created, of importing and exporting, but a lot of those carts were holding rations that were given by the federal government to the Native Americans. And a lot of times they came spoiled. Um, some of them were just in bad condition, but they were giving them out anyhow. And so land acknowledgements, it's a lot deeper. And yes, if you can create a land acknowledgement, please do so. Place it on your website. Um, Include the tribes to participate in crafting the land acknowledgement so you get it right. And if you are having a community presentation or something, you want to invite the tribes, like at least a delegate from the tribal council to participate.
And next question would be, what are your thoughts to the receptiveness of Idaho's news media with regard to appropriately and adequately covering Idaho's tribes and the issue of our state's tribe and the issues our state's tribes are facing?
Repeat the question.
What are your thoughts as to the receptiveness of Idaho's news media with regard to appropriately and adequately covering Idaho's tribes and the issues our state's tribes are facing?
It's not enough. I feel that uh, tribal public relations within the five tribes should be invited to participate in providing a weekly editorial update on what the tribes are doing. Each of the five tribes are doing a lot of awesome things. Um, I don't think it's enough. I mean, I read the newspaper, and, one thing from a tribal perspective is, I'm looking for tribal stories, and it really lacks. And I know that when I was in my previous position, the local newspaper gave us the opportunity to have the chairman give an update on what's going on in Fort Hall. I felt that that was, you know, awesome. And sometimes we provided something and sometimes we didn't, just because it was just too busy. The council's jobs, it's Monday through Friday, sometimes evenings and weekends. So a lot of times, it's hard for a tribal leader to gather their thoughts and present something. But just being able to give that space for tribes to provide an article on what's going on in their communities is really important. But I have not seen that happen.
And just to kind of piggyback off of the media piece, we had another question about tribal newsletters. Is there a local newsletter for the Shoshone-Bannock tribe, and where might people sign up for that, if there is?
So good question. So we do have a Shoshone-Bannock newspaper. It's called the Shoban News. And it comes out every Thursday, and you can actually they have a Facebook page, so you can contact them and sign up for receiving the paper. They used to be 25 cents, and now they've moved up, they've increased because the cost of printing newspapers has gone up. Um, And so it's $1. But if you subscribe, you can do that. And I know that I believe the Shoshone Paiute also have a newsletter and Coeur d'Alene. So not all tribes have their own newspapers, and because it's just because of the budget constrictions. But please do sign up for Shoban News, the Shopai, and Coeur d'Alene.
And for those who want to reach out to tribal leaders or delegates to get their input on projects, what's the best way to contact them?
Contact them from their official websites. I know that each tribe has their own website that they administer and update. So you want to go ahead and reach out to their tribal websites. And out of the 5 tribes, only 3 of the tribes have a communications department and or a public affairs manager or public relations, where they can assist you if you would like to connect with the council and or connect with the tribe.
With all the ongoing journalist turnover, how do you deal with the constant education that you have to do? I think the tools like strengthening tribal consultation and nation-to-nation relationships document helps.
I would suggest hosting cultural sensitivity trainings, maintain a quarterly, bring in a tribal representative to talk about cultural sensitivity, and just talk about the tribes and what they're doing, their history. I think that was one thing that was pretty popular, that I started to see is requests for bringing us to talk about the tribes, and they called it cultural sensitivity training. I do know that a lot of HR departments uh, would include that for new employees. And so I would highly suggest including some type of cultural sensitivity training within your workplace. And if you don't have it, then explore and see what tribes you live next to, and see if they can bring somebody in to talk about it.
That's great. Thank you. We have about 5, 6 minutes left. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I did want to give you the platform if you have any upcoming projects or initiatives that you're working on that you'd like to share with people or where they can find you if they have more questions or want to connect.
If let's see, I think on the last slide, Clay, if you can bring that one up, the last slide. So I do have my email address here. If you have any questions, you can reach me via email. And then of course, you can Google me as well. I've got a lot of information on Google. Um, but I would just like to say, thank you for this opportunity to share my world with all of you. It's definitely, I have a lot of layers of just the expertise that I have learned throughout my life. Originally, I was in the museum field studying anthropology and museum work, and then just kind of moving into the tribal government sector, not knowing that that was my niche. And I I thoroughly enjoy it. I enjoy working with federal officials and just being part of a dynamic team of being able to share my culture and Native American culture, and the fact that we're still here. We don't live in teepees. We don't ride horse all the time. Even though, yes, I grew up riding horse. That was the first thing that I think I was 4 years old when I started riding horse. But you know, just the fact that Native American people are still here and we're thriving, and you might be working with a tribal member. And so just being able to introduce yourself and ask some questions of that individual makes them feel at home. It makes them feel accepted in the workplace. So,
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We know you're super busy with all your different projects, but we're really grateful that you were able to kind of educate us and show us the path forward as communicators and as people to make sure that we are respecting the culture and the values of all the tribal nations in our country and beyond. So, thank you to everyone who attended today. Like I said, if you want to learn more, Randiel has a website. It's randielteton.com. You can find more information there. If you have more information about our chapter and what we do, if you're not a member, you can head to prsaidaho.org and learn more about the chapter as well. Thank you all so much for coming, and we will have a recording available of this presentation soon. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you.